Make sense? Okay. There is something called damping. Damping and driving, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. Damping and driving is adding energy to the system. This pendulum has pretty much slowed down because there's friction in the tape up there, the magnet, and friction down here, and air friction. So if you want a pendulum to keep going, you have to add energy to it, add force, and that's called driving the pendulum. Does driving the pendulum change its period?
Yes.
No.
When you are pushing a kid on a swing, does it change the period of the kid?
No.
Correct answer is no. No, it does not. Driving the kid, driving the swing does not add any does not add any period or any frequency. It only adds amplitude. Again, these are the two terms that determine period. Amplitude is not in there. By driving the kid, you're adding to her amplitude, but you're not changing her period. Same thing, if I was to ask you to time this pendulum, and then ask you 5 minutes from now to keep timing it, you would get the same period. Even though it has a much different amplitude. Okay. Are we cool with this? If we have time, we'll do some practices. I'm not sure how much time we're going to have. Shall we move on to springs? Okay. The vectors of springs are, for some people, simpler, for some people, more complex. Okay, so a spring. We're going to deal with hanging springs, because hanging springs are the easiest things to learn about. So in this class, our springs are pretty much always going to be hanging. So you have a hanging spring. If it's not moving, much like this one's not moving, that means there is an upward restoring force given by Hooke's law and a downward weight. And if the thing on the spring is not moving, then how do those two vectors compare? They are equal. The downward weight and the upward restoring force given by Hooke's law are equal. So at the equilibrium point, in this diagram here and here, the vectors are equal, hence no acceleration. So what is the acceleration at the equilibrium point of a spring? 0. 0, right? It's 0 because at the equilibrium point, the downward weight and the upward restoring force are the same. They're just in opposite directions. Now, if I bring this mass down, I add a little more of my extra force. Now, we have a situation where it is below the equilibrium point, which means the x in Hooke's law has gone up. If the x in Hooke's law has gone up, what happens to the force? It's also gone up. So what's bigger now, the weight down or the restoring force up? Restoring force up. So when I release it, what is it going to do? And go way up by science. Try that again with science terms. There is now a net force, and where there is a net force, there must be a acceleration. And that's what happens. When a net force exists, an acceleration will also exist. So that difference in force, that net force divided by the mass of whatever's on it, ignoring the mass of the spring, will give us our acceleration. Now you might notice that it doesn't just go all the way up and keep going up, because eventually, as the mass goes beyond above the equilibrium point, what happens to that restoring force? It decreases. The restoring force is small because the x has gotten very, very small. What happened to the weight? Did the weight change? No, but the restoring force did. So when you're up above that point, you have a situation where the restoring force is now poquito, but the weight is the same weight as before. So now you have a direction of net force as in what direction? Down. And if you have a downward net force, the direction of acceleration is now down. We're going to do this in a simulation. There's a couple really cool PhET simulations that deal with springs and pendulums. The first one we're going to be doing tomorrow on pendulums. So the vectors are constantly getting wonky. The force, the weight down is constant, but the force up is big, small, big. So small, big, small, big, which means the acceleration is small, big, upside down, or like small upwards, then 0, then small downwards, then big downwards, then small downwards, then 0, then small upwards, then big upwards. Then you get the idea. So the force vector is going up, then down, then up, then down. So the net force is going big, small, big, small, big, small, big, small, and the acceleration is going big, small, big, small, big, small, and 0 in the middle.
Wow.
Yeah. I hope you spend some time on the simulations looking at the vectors so you can memorize these. Now the math of a spring is really interesting. The math of the period of a spring is 2 pi radical m over k. And again, I'm not going to go into the derivations for this. I'm just going to basically say, it's on your formula chart. If you want to memorize it, it's great, but it's on your formula chart. I don't know if it actually says of spring of pendulum, but I know the 2 pi radical formulas are on there. Yeah, it says TS and TP, period spring, period pendulum. So it should make sense that spring constant is in the formula. The stronger your spring is, a really stiff spring would produce a period that's very stiff, very high, very coefficient spring would produce a period that is very small. Big denominator means a small number. And similarly, if you are trying to move a very large mass with a very large inertia, it should make sense that a very large mass is going to have a what kind of period? A big period. Okay. More inertia, because of more mass, means it's going to bounce slower. You have a moving van, and you go over a bump. If your moving van is empty, you're on your way home because you're going to move. Your moving van is empty, you go over a bump, it goes, here's on. You fill your moving van full of furniture, you go over a bump and it goes, boom, boom. True story. Yeah. Because you have doubled the mass of your vehicle, you're going to have a larger period of bump. Okay. And of course there's Hooke's Law. Everybody loves Hooke's Law. And we'll talk about those later. Okay. Dampers with springs work exactly the same way. A spring, basically, the spring is not a shock. You ever like shock absorbers on your car? Shock absorbers are not the spring. They're the cylinder of oil. Basically, a shock absorber is it's a cylinder inside a cylinder filled with oil, and as it goes through the oil, it basically is viscous. It doesn't want to go through the oil. Kind of like if you try to punch somebody in the pool, there's a lot of friction on your fist. That's what's happening. The cylinder is trying to punch another cylinder with oil, so it doesn't want to. So it creates a damping effect. That's what happens with a shock absorber. A shock absorber is the thing filled with oil. What we usually have now are coilovers, where the spring goes around the shock absorber to save space, so they look like one thing. But anyway, that's shock absorber. So damping and driving a spring works exactly the same as damping or driving a pendulum. It doesn't change the period, it does change the amplitude. Adding energy to the system or taking energy away from the system, adding energy in the form of driving or taking energy away from the system in the form of damping, it changes the amplitude but doesn't change the period. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you're with me so far. Give me a hand waving around if you're panicking. Really? Okay, so how can I help you?
It's just a lot.
It's just a lot? Okay. The good news is you have a formula chart in that your period is going to be, the period of a spring, Ts, is going to be 2 pi radical m over k. And Tp is going to be 2 pi radical L over g. So if you just remember, use those formulas, remember what thing changes the period, then you're going to be good. And if you remember that amplitude is how far you are from the equilibrium, for a hanging spring up or down, for a pendulum back or forth, then you're going to be good. And we have a bunch of really cool simulations. The FET sims are really impressive with these. Okay, so there was this thing that happened thousands of years ago. A legion was 1,000 Roman troops. And they basically marched in a 10 by 10 box until they needed to form some other design to attack the enemy. And as they would walk boom, 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 in step. Because what would happen is if their steps came down at the same time, they would cause, like you guys in the bleachers, would cause the ground to vibrate. It's like, next time you guys want to produce a lot of energy, get coordinated in your rah-rahs, and everybody hit the floor at the same time. So it goes boom, boom. If you just like you basically create what's called dissonance. You want to cause resonance, where all the booms are lined up. That's resonance. And that's what the Roman legions would do. They would walk in step, boom, boom, boom. Because you'd feel and hear the ground vibrate, and you're like, oh crap, the Romans. Send somebody out. We surrender. There's no way. We can't keep up with someone who could make thunder like that. So and that's what they do. They would go into a town and they go boom, boom, and people would be like, we don't want to fight you. We can see you're serious business. We don't want to fight you. But there was a problem with that idea, that tactic, and it was a military tactic, is if they came to a bridge, boom, 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 they might vibrate the ground so much that the bridge would collapse. And it's really embarrassing if you lose half of your army to falling into a river before you even get to the town. You're like, oh, those Romans, yeah, I think we can take them. They just lost half their army in the river. So they would instead of going boom, boom, they would have one group going boom, 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 and one group going ba-boom, 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 and one group going ba-ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. So they would basically cause their cadence to create dissonance, to reduce the amount of energy. The same thing happens in noise-canceling headphones. One wave goes in, and your noise-canceling headphones listens to it, and then produces a wave that cancels it out. That's called superposition, and we'll get to that when we do sound waves, which is next time. Okay, so that's driven harmonic motion. When a small force is applied at intervals equal to the period, we create what's called mechanical resonance. Mechanical resonance. You create mechanical resonance with your lips and on a trumpet, with a bowstring on a cello. So, I don't know if anyone's ever, I'm sure someone's taken a high-speed camera to a bowstring on a violin, but they do what's called slipstick resonance, where the string is constantly tapping the bow is constantly tapping the string. Tap, 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 tap. Kind of like if you took your hand, I mean, you know when you wipe yourself out on the gym floor and you're like, boom, 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 boom. You can have like rub, 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 rub. That's what's going on with the bowstring on a violin. It's going tap, 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 tap. It's adding pulses of energy, and adding pulses of energy creates mechanical resonance in the violin string. It's called slipstick resonance. I will show you that next week when we do sound waves. You're gonna love it. It's gonna get really noisy. Okay. Some of you are still scribbling. Alexa, who was president during the Tacoma Narrows Bridge event?
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Neither am I. So, where else do you see mechanical resonance? Pianos, yeah. With a piano, you strike the string and vibration goes boing, 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 back and forth. The string, and that causes it to make noise. Earthquakes? Yeah. If you get a small boop, if you get a small movement, boop, you get one shock wave. If you get a big movement, you get a big shock wave. And there was this thing. They called it Galloping Gertie, and it was a bridge over the Tacoma Narrows. It's called the Tacoma Narrows because it's well, the river goes, it's narrow, and the wind from the Puget Sound would rush through the area. And I have a video you're going to love. And sometimes it comes up on the PowerPoint, and sometimes it doesn't. So we'll see who's going to come up with the PowerPoint. That is a not. Okay, so today it's going to be a not. That's okay. This is, by the way, the footage here is colorized. They did not have color stop motion. They did not have color video at the time. But this is the president. I want to say Hoover, but I don't know for sure. And this is the actual motion of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Wind would go under the bridge and lift it up, and the next gust of wind would basically they would fall again. Next gust of wind would lift it up, would fall again. Next gust of wind, and that is actually what it did. Now, when it was that severe, they would close the bridge. They did, but they didn't predict. I'm going to say climate change. They didn't predict the winds to get as strong as they actually got, and around about 1950s, 1960s, yeah. Oh, here's one. Alexa, when did the Tacoma Narrows Bridge fail?
Here's something I found from the article Tacoma Narrows Bridge, 1940, on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
The Bronx White Stone Bridge, which is of similar design to the 1940 Tacoma Narrows Bridge, was reinforced shortly after the collapse.
FDR?
Did that answer
Okay,
your
that's
question?
Yes. So
Thanks for your
this was a video 70 years ago, and again it was colorized by computer. They didn't have color photography, but that's what the Tacoma Narrows Bridge did, because there was pulses of wind that would cause the flip. Now that was 70 years ago. Do we learn from our mistakes? Oh no, we do not. Silly Americans, we will do it better. This is a Volgograd Bridge from 10 years ago. Yeah, they can actually make flexible concrete. That is a bridge in Western Russia, and that's what it does. These are springs that allow the bridge to do that.
Wait, it's silly Americans. This is the Russians.
Yeah.
Not all of them are
Oh no, it's still there. It's just kind of, yeah, it's just pretty crazy that it does that.
That was pretty fun. I'm always like, let's go on.
Going to North Pole, and then we'll do the rest of it.
Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Should we take the
So,
bus?
if you want to learn more about the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, there's a new one there, by the way. They actually have a cable stay bridge.